at a certain point, Deitch Projects approached me and asked me to do an installation, and that was a kind of a huge moment because they are a different sort of a gallery than a lot of galleries, and Jeffrey is somebody who's really open to artists, just pitching an idea and then going for it. And so I had kind of had this city in my mind for a long time, which is, at night I basically dream about walking through these kind of fantastical environments all the time. And so, I had been drawing my whole life and painting in the language of drawing and painting. And sort of at the back of my mind, there was this fantasy that one day I would be able to create something which took everything that I understood about drawing and that I understood about painting, and it would translate it into an environment where those relationships were now three-dimensional, and you could walk through it, and you could be inside the experience of it, and be inside the experience that I myself am having, at night while I'm sleeping, or just my own experience of the city. And so I explained that vision to Jeffrey, and he said, sure, let's do it. And I just sort of set about creating what was then the biggest project I'd ever done, which was this installation on Grand Street. I had a tremendous amount of help. It was the first time I had ever worked with a crew, and it was amazing and difficult. And it was another one of those experiences that affirmed for me that whenever you're working closely with people that you love, that the experience becomes so much more valuable. And I think that this project really led me to want to work on more big group projects like the Miss Rockaway Armada, which I'll talk about. This is a room at the back. So sort of, some things just kind of visions pop in all at once, and then you try to make them. These are Medusas, and this was just sort of shots from around the room. This one is pretty inspired by Vermeer's Lace Maker, I guess. This is my friend Allison. The entrance was kind of like a subway tunnel. I wanted the feeling of kind of passage when you walked through. And so now this is, that was all of 76 grand, and now this is an installation that I did in Moscow. It was a kind of a funny thing where I was invited to do this installation in Moscow, and I got to the gallery, and they were like, oh, can you not touch anything? Can you not paint the walls? And I was like, oh, you don't know who you invited. What's going on? And I kept trying to make everything dirty, and finally this little old lady said, oh, why don't you just go into the basement? And I said, what basement? And then it turned out that there was this amazing 13th century salt cellar with a tunnel that led to the Kremlin. And I made my installation in there, and it was really kind of perfect for me. This is a piece at the Brooklyn Museum, and this process of making work and putting it out on the street and communicating with people really opened up into a lot of other processes for me, and one of them is this working and traveling and doing a variety of installations in different places. And the working on the street has never become any less important than working inside, because they're just very different animals. It's one of those things for me where both processes feed the other. This is a place in Bilbao, Spain. It was a really kind of a strange yard where I worked. I found this lot where all these buildings had been taken down, and I worked in it for a couple days, and eventually people started leaning their heads out the window, and they were saying, hey, thanks for working here, because all these people just got kicked out of their houses and these buildings were crushed, and we all feel really sad about it, and we know you guys are foreigners and you probably didn't even know when you stumbled upon this, but we feel like there's a little bit of sort of a memorial to what was here going on in the work that you're doing. And that's the kind of thing for me that happens when you're working outside. I was a stranger and totally ignorant of that environment, but you put yourself in the world, and then the world comes to you when you're working in the city. And there are hundreds of stories in that same vein, which are the very reason why I continue to work outside, that it was really important for me early on to try and make work that contextualized itself within my daily life. I felt like I moved to New York City, and I had been really focused on classical painting and the history of art in this kind of real capital A sense. And when I got to New York, I just kind of freaked out and realized that there wasn't, as far as I could tell, a space for me within that. And I felt that I had to kind of create my own context and make things which made themselves a part of my own world. And so that was a lot of this impulse of going outside and figuring out different contexts and not waiting for a context to come to me, but to make my own. And of course, people were working on the street at the time. This is a portrait of two women in Waka, and this is the 11 Spring Street, which was an exhibition that just happened here in Lower Manhattan. This is another process picture. It's my friend Zara was very inspired by the goddess Artemis, is the woman that you see next to her. And this is a sort of an in-process installation in Kiev. My sister as a mermaid. Somewhere along I'm from Florida, and I grew up near the ocean, and it's this funny thing that, I moved to the city, and the city impacted me utterly, But at a certain point, something starts to kind of creep back in from the place where you were born. And so all this kind of aquatic stuff started to sort of creep back into the way that I was working. And I guess this will lead us to the Miss Rockaway Armada, which was how to really explain that. It had been a long kind of dream of mine to make. The thing about the street posters is this thing of trying to communicate with people where they are, trying to bring people something in the place where they live, in a place where they're not necessarily expecting it, where they don't have to get on the train or get in a taxi and travel up to 53rd Street and pay $20 and go to a place where they might not feel comfortable, but where they are just living and being. And so, at first it seems kind of funny that 1 minute I'm doing street posters and 1 minute I'm working on this raft that goes down the Mississippi River, but honestly, it's kind of coming from the exact same place, the desire to make something that is sort of just like a seed that spreads, that blows on the wind and ends up in different places. And so I had this dream of making a kind of an art space out of salvaged materials that was experimenting with various more sustainable ways of living and working, and which also traveled down a river. And so I've been talking about it, honestly, for years with friends of mine. And then one day it was just like the time and space opened up, and the idea had circulated enough times that it started to blossom from a single vessel to a flotilla of rafts, and that became something that more people could be invested in and be involved in. And so we just went for it. I started talking to more and more people, and we started making sketches and building models. One person talked to the next person, talked to the next person. There's a ton of collectives that I've been working with over the last couple of years, from the Madagascar Institute to, all the collectives that were mentioned. And so each person would send out, we drafted this email saying this is what we're dreaming about doing, and then everyone would send it out to, to the Beehive or to any kind of group or collective that they were working with, and it would get passed around. And then a group of people formed, and we were having meetings in New York City. We found a place in New York City to actually build rafts, if you can believe that, in Chelsea. We went around to construction sites and collected old plywood, and then we packed it up and found these amazing people in Minneapolis that gave us a lot to build on. Here we are, styrofoam and plywood, raising the roof, testing it out. I mean, this was euphoric, that you made something out of garbage, and it floats and it goes. We built those motors are built out of old Volkswagen motors because we wanted to run on biodiesel or veggie grease, and we couldn't find diesel outboards, so we had to make them. We passed our Coast Guard inspection. And there we are. And I've never experienced anything like this in my life. When I started to do the portraits and the street posters in New York City, people were responding to me in a way that was really startling. And all of the effort that I was putting into creating a sort of a human object, I felt was largely understood by people, and I was really surprised by that. But this was an instance where, this was about 60 people were involved in this project, and people worked their butts off, and people put their hearts into it. And when we would pull up in a town, I really felt like people understood that utterly. They were like, oh, this monstrosity, this kind of magical monstrosity is coming out of nowhere and is coming to visit us. And there was this crazy kind of unjaded response that people would just scream, what are you? What are you doing here? And just sort of the myth of the Mississippi River and the American Midwest and campfires. And a lot is going on. We are about 30 people living on this boat, so you can see that any number of things happening in this picture. I'm really blazing through it. There's too much to this story, but I'm just kind of trying to... This is a bicycle-powered raft. We gave workshops, and we had a show. We would kind of parade through town and announce our existence. And we developed a show along the way. A lot of these, the props and things were being made while we were underway. The show was being developed. Musicians were collaborating. People were writing a story. And then we would pull up in a town to the banks of the river and tell people, come back at 7. And people poured out of their houses with bushels of tomatoes and clean socks and said, do your parents know you're here? And it was amazing. I could just say again, I've never seen anything like it. So this is actually my last slide. And I think that I haven't talked in a while, so I was a little nervous, and I kind of blazed through a lot of things. But I think it might be nice to just go ahead and open up to questions now, and maybe some of the stuff that I forgot will come back to me. Thanks, guys.